Okay, so this is intended to be an example for you guys to work through without my help, and then I'm going to work through it afterwards so you can kind of check and make sure that you've got the two large nation model under just perfectly under wraps. So imagine that we have two nations, Japan and Australia, that in the beginning are not trading. So without trade, what will be the equilibrium price and quantity in the computer market in Japan and then in Australia? And so that's just review. And then 2, if they trade, what will be the equilibrium? And then 3, this is kind of going back to the small nation example with a world market. If the world price for a computer is $500, will Japan import or export computers, and how many? And then what will Australia do? So I'm going to just pause here for about 5 seconds, and you should pause the video, take your time, work through this, get an answer that you're comfortable with, and then when I come back, we're going to go ahead and work through this. Okay, at this point, you should have your answers down, and I'm going to go ahead and work through this and just kind of lay out how to do this problem. So without trade, what will be the equilibrium price and quantity in the computer market in Japan? Well, this is super simple. This is back to the very beginning of the year. We're just going to go and find what price will set demand equal to supply in the Japanese market. So we want to find where demand is equal to supply. So we're just going to go down, and we're going to see that when when the price of a computer is $1,000, demand in Japan is they're demanding 500 computers, so the Japanese want 500 computers, and the Japanese are willing to produce 500 computers. So I'm going to pick this bright red that I used for the lettering up there, and we're going to just go ahead and try and box that right there. So that's A. In Japan, the price will be $1,000 and the quantity will be $500 or 500 computers. So in Australia, though, we see that that is not the case. If we go over at $1,000 in Australia, the Australians demand 2,500 computers, and they're only willing to produce 500 computers. So we have to go all the way down to the very bottom where we see that Australia has an equilibrium when the price of a computer is $2,000. And then the Australians will demand 1,500 computers, and the Australians will supply 1,500 computers. So without trade, the price for a computer in Australia will be $2,000, and the quantity for a computer will be 1,500. There will be 1,500 computers produced and sold, or purchased, however you want to look at it. Okay, so now we're on to the new stuff. If Japan and Australia trade, what will be the equilibrium price and quantity in the computer market? So the way that I like to do this if I get a table is I like to construct a new column that I'm just going to call the world. And so I'm going to have demand, that's an awful D. I'm going to have demand, and then I'm going to have supply. So and I'm going to move this entire thing up a little bit, excuse me. So in the world, I will go ahead and then have demand here and supply here. So at a price of $100, Japan wants 1,000 computers and Australia wants 5,000 computers. So the entire world wants 6,000. And the entire world is willing to supply 50 plus 40 is 90. So that's obviously not an equilibrium for the world. Now if we go down the next line, we get 750 plus 4,000 is 4,750. And 250 plus 200, the entire world is willing to supply only 450 computers at a price of 500. Then if we go down to 1,000, we have Japan demanding 500 computers and Australia demanding 2,500. So the entire world demands 3,000. And the entire world is willing to supply 1,000. So again, we don't have an equilibrium. Now we're going to go over to $1,500 per computer. And we're going to see that the Japanese demand 250 computers and the Australians demand 2,000 computers, so we have 2,250 computers demanded. And then if we add 1,000 to 1,250, we have also 2,250 computers supplied. So this is our equilibrium right here at $1,500 or $1,500 per computer. And the next part we're going to go ahead and work out. I'm not going to go ahead and just tell it to you right now. So we have the price will be $1,500, and then the quantity will be 2,250, which we figured out over here, because that's the quantity demanded and supplied. And then one question that I didn't ask, but I should have asked here, is will Japan export or import, and how many will they export or import? And then the same thing for Australia. So here, at a price of $1,500, the Japanese demand 250 computers, and they supply 1,000 computers. So if we just take the difference for the Japanese, and I'll go ahead and do this in red up here. So for the Japanese, they produce 1,000, and they consume, or they demand, 250. 250. So if we just subtract those two, we get that they have an excess, or a surplus, of 750 computers. And this is at a price of 1,500, which we already determined puts the world in equilibrium. So if the world's in equilibrium, then the Japanese have to be doing something with this surplus of 750, and what they're doing is they're trading it to Australia. So Japan is sending 750 computers to Australia at the equilibrium. And then the very last thing is, if the world price for a computer is $500, will Japan import or export computers, and how many? And then what will Australia do? So I just wanted to go back and do a little extra review. So let's say that the world price now is $500 per computer. Japan then is going to import computers. They're going to import the difference between demand and supply. So all we need to do is do 750 minus 250 to get 500. And since Japan is consuming or demanding 750 computers, and they're only producing or supplying 250 computers, it's easy to see that they're going to import 500 computers because they're consuming more than they make domestically. And then the exact same thing for Australia. We'll just pick a different color. So Australia then is going to demand 4,000, or they're going to consume 4,000, and they're only going to produce 200. So they are going to import 3,800 computers. So for this to happen, there would have to be a bunch of other nations in the world that wanted to produce computers cheaper than both Japan and Australia to set the world price of a computer at 500. So I hope that made sense, and that's really all that we need to be able to do with a two large nation model. You need to be able to do the same thing with graphs, but since I already worked on that in the presentation of it in the last two videos, I think that we're pretty good on that, and that's all for that.